Let's get right to MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid in Dubai, Bloomberg White House correspondent Jeff Mason, and The Atlantic's Arash Azizi. Jeff, Trump says his conditions include Iran ending its uranium enrichment and handing over all the so-called nuclear dust the process creates. What more do we know about these talks?
Well, that's the question, Anna. We're still trying to get more information on that. Who exactly is involved in these talks? Who from the U.S. side? Who from the Iranian side? And whether or not there's a third party coming in or helping to facilitate the talks from the Middle East, from Europe. All of that is still a little bit murky, but it is certainly something that the market welcomed today. The fact that the president is pulling back from his threats of not too long ago on those power plants. Is certainly welcomed by energy markets. And it seems like, based on the president's history, that the market pressure, the bond market, the stock market, the energy markets may have had an impact in forcing him or encouraging him in any way to stand back a little bit.
Arash, the U.S., of course, was in the middle of talks or negotiations with Iran when it launched those strikes on February 28th. Kind of same situation back in June when it launched strikes as well. Why would anyone in Iran trust the Trump administration in any further negotiations?
Well, diplomatic talks don't really ever work on trust, and there will be a problem. I think that problem can be addressed by guarantors that can be brought upon. If there was to be a deal, you could have China, Russia, or perhaps regional countries like Pakistan or Turkey or Saudi, adding their name to any sort of a deal. And these are countries that President Trump has good relations. And while he wouldn't tell you who he is talking to in Iran, I think I can tell you, and I think based on my estimation, it's probably Baghar Ghalibaf, who's the Speaker of Parliament, who's effectively running the war effort. So I think it's his people, and that's who President Trump has in mind. And if you know anything about Mr. Ghalibaf, there are chances that he could come to an agreement with the U.S.
Does he have the backing of this new supreme leader, who you have said is the ultimate theocratic Nepo baby?
Yeah, I don't think the supreme leader matters. I think it's the other way around. I think the real power is held by Ghalibaf, is held by other sort of military figures in the regime. I think if Mojtaba he's probably alive, but the regime itself says that he was injured. But even if he is healthy, it would take some time before he can assert his power. So if Mr. Ghalibaf wants to carry out a deal with the United States, he has, I believe, the ability to bring the regime with him.
Quickly, if you will, what do you make of Iran reportedly denying that there are any kind of negotiations taking place?
Well, it's how it works. They don't want, for now, all the Iranian state TV is saying, well, we pressured Trump back. He had to back out of the attack, and they want to show it like that, but they will be secretly talking. It's also noteworthy that, it's sort of the IRGC and the state broadcasters that immediately said we're not talking. But if you look at Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, his tweet yesterday was effectively, quite conciliatory. Basically, he was like, oh, well, we haven't closed down the Hormuz Strait. So it was clear that they wanted to come off this confrontation. They're ready to go for it if it happens, but they wanted to come off the confrontation.
Inzamam, how's the region viewing today's new comments by President Trump?
Well, Anna, they'll be breathing a sigh of relief here, because we knew that if the president was to carry out these attacks alongside Israel, targeting power plants in Iran, then Iran would have retaliated, and would have retaliated swiftly, but also incredibly strongly. And that would have come to the Gulf states, like here in the UAE, where I am. There is a huge logistics and energy facility behind me, Jebel Ali Port, which has been on the target list. But the Gulf countries will be breathing a huge sigh of relief tonight. I've been speaking to some official sources in the UAE, and that's exactly the feeling, because now they know that at least for now, this potential threat has been kicked down the road. So, yeah, a bit of relief this evening. But just on the whole talks, because that's what it seems to be at the minute, there are conversations clearly going on. I've been speaking to a few diplomats this evening inside Tehran who've suggested to me that it is the likes of Turkey, Oman, Pakistan, maybe even Egypt involved in some of these conversations for de-escalation. All these countries throwing their names in the hat to essentially be some form of mediator, some form of chief negotiator between Israel, the US, and Iran as well. So conversations are clearly being had, and they were escalated over the last couple of days, ever since President Trump came out and said that he would target Iran's power plant facilities within 48 hours if they didn't reopen the Strait of Hormuz. What we do know is that the Strait of Hormuz tonight still very much remains closed, and very few ships are passing through. Those ships are mainly Iranian oil tankers leaving the ports of Iran and heading to the likes of India and China, mainly China. So other countries aren't managing to get their goods through the Strait of Hormuz. Usually around 20% of the world's oil passes through there, and that's why we're seeing this huge global oil crisis. Yes, we've seen the price of oil drop after Donald Trump made those remarks today. However, if the strait remains shut, then the volatility around oil prices and the impact that it has on people around the world will remain. I think also Iran will essentially be breathing a sigh of relief tonight as well, because if the US was to carry out those strikes on the power plant, which that isn't completely off the table, we have to bear in mind, it's just essentially been kicked down the road. If it does happen, it will impact millions of people in that country, not terrorist sites, not nuclear sites, not US military bases here in the Gulf. It would impact millions of everyday people inside Iran, Anna.
Yeah, and Jeff, the U.S. did not agree to hold off on all strikes right now, just the ones targeting those power plants. I want to play what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said yesterday. Let's listen.
I think he said he could wind the war down at any time he wants. And, Kristen, this is the only language the Iranians understand.
Is the president in the process of winding down this war or escalating the conflict?
Again, they're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate.
Escalate to de-escalate. Hasn't the U.S. tried this before without positive results? Certainly Afghanistan and Vietnam come to mind.
It's very difficult to interpret that comment, and I will not try. But I do think if we look at the evidence, the president and his administration and his cabinet officials have been sending mixed signals from day one of this war about what their objectives were and what the plans and strategies were. And there have been many things that have influenced that. I was mentioning earlier how the markets seem to be playing a role. The president, I think, is the ultimate decider. And he is the latest signals that he's given is exactly what you said, Anna, is that they're going to hold off on these strikes on power plants. But he has also said before that he is not ready for a ceasefire. And so the war is certainly continuing. The question will be whether or not these talks lead to any sort of deal that he continues or that he considers acceptable, and not just for, I think, saving face purposes, but it's worth remembering that this is a president who does not like to be associated with the word loser. So he's going to want something that makes him feel like he has won. And that psychology is at least a part of what's going on here, in addition to all of the major economic, human ramifications as well.
Inzamam, you talked about how the ramifications of obliterating the power supply would be devastating for everyday civilians, especially because the water systems in these desert nations are so integrated into the energy grid, right? What targets could still be in the crosshairs if there is no deal in 5 days? And what does international law say about it?
Well, targeting a power plant is a war crime, but I don't think Israel or the US right now are really thinking about that. I think they'll fight that in court if they were to go ahead with something like this, given the scale of this conflict already. I think the impact would be hugely severe, not only inside Iran if power plants there were to be struck, but also what Iran would do in retaliation to the Gulf countries. We know they've already struck a number of energy facilities, which is having huge knock-on effects in the region, but also the rest of the globe. And they would continue to do so. You know, we've got some of the world's largest oil refineries in this region, and Iran has very much got their sights on those oil refineries. So I think, look, Trump appears to have blinked first in this argument, Anna, whether it's a kind of a full climb down or whether it's completely chickening out. That's something we'll have to see in the days to come. But the US and its allies cannot afford to leave Iran with this kind of de facto control of the strait. And they also can't afford to leave the Gulf with this threat of having their energy facilities completely targeted. It's the crown jewels, and that would be disastrous for the whole world. So Trump and his advisors, it seems right now, are in a bit of a box of their own, kind of making and desperately trying to find a way out of this situation. And that's why he's come out with these comments this evening.